Mark reached out to me and said, would you like to speak? And I said, not without you. So therefore we decided to do it together. So, and a lot of the talks today are about technical things. And we thought we'd take a little bit of a different spin on it and talk about the usability of technology today. So.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, so today we're going to talk about unlocking AI and how to empower data scientists to serve user needs. And yeah, and Marinka and I have worked together, but yeah, we're sort of facilitating, speaking today. And our companies aren't related, but we're giving our talk there. Yeah. So okay, so our question for you, if you have it, is basically, have you or someone you know built a great model only to find out that 6 months down the road, no one was using it? I know there's only a few of us in here, but does that ever happen where you built something and no one wound up using it?
And maybe on online, feel free to raise your hand. So.
See any hands?
Yes. Okay.
Okay, good. Yeah, thank you. So that probably happened. So we're going to talk about our framework for 10 minutes. We're going to use some case examples. And then if there's time left over, we'll do a audience discussion and hear about your issues.
So really, what we're here to talk about is the connection between what you build AI and the connection of value tied to the use of the AI, the product, the analytic, whatever it is. And so in reality, the relationship between value and use is really tied to this quadrant that we have. So not many people, although we do use a lot of things every day, that are pretty much low value and are fairly trivial. Really what we want to do is focus our attention to things that are used highly and that give us a lot of value, right? And that's the goal of any product that we've put together. Now, what Mark was talking about was the fact that many times people will spend tons and tons of energy and time and money to build AI or build some type of product that is actually later shelved, and nobody understands why. And we really want to move it because it's half of it is, I think, perception, and it's a missed opportunity. And so the idea is to go from being shelved or a missed opportunity where it's not used to actually having it being engaged in the workflow of businesses, of corporate, of your consumers, et cetera. And so, because I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning saying, oh, I want to build something that's never going to be used and that has no, that's trivial and has no impact to the world today. I don't think that's what we want.
Probably no.
No.
Very few.
So we were thinking about it, and it's really tied to the relationship between data, need, and action, and the interactions between those three components. So what are those components? Those things, data is really the raw information that we use to process through our analytics, through our products, through our cloud, everything that we bring in and ingest. The need is why we do it, which is the specific problem or goal that we're trying to address. And then finally, the action is how we're going to do it and the steps that we take around the decisions or the acts that we're going to do to try to address that need.
Yeah.
And so part of that is really the result of that kind of trilogy is if you don't do that correctly, then you end up with waste or ignorance, right? Or misdirection, right? If you don't use data in some type of action or need, then you're going to get misdirection. If you don't have if you have a great need but no action, then you're paralyzed, right? And so if you don't do it correctly, you're going to end up there will be barriers in front of you, versus if you do it correctly and you take into account those three components, you will develop things that have value, are informed, focused, that energize the users, and that also can accelerate the development of your product, of your business, and et cetera. You had something else.
Oh, yeah. And one interesting thing about this to me, in projects at least that I've been involved in, is that if you make a mistake or leave something out here, it's not like there's an alarm going off saying like, oh, you guys need to refine your action. It just sort of happens, and then you bump into your problems downstream, right? So maybe you didn't clarify exactly what's needed, or exactly, didn't correct some data issue or something like that. You wind up, after much sort of headache later on, realizing that you went astray somewhere and course correcting. And that can take longer than if you just really kind of got it all set in the first place. So part of that, yeah, is why it's interesting to me is to look at that. So I'll give an example of things that that we bumped into in the past. So one is fraud detection. And so first I'll walk you through what the usual business process is when you're using AI for fraud detection. So you can look at that sort of business process flow on the top. And so you start with data, of course, your data, claims data, provider data, member data, so it's sitting somewhere in the cloud or on-prem. And you build an AI model, an anomaly detection model, to try and find providers who are potentially acting suspicious, right? And you can do that, and you can go, you have your model running, you have your success criteria, and a lot of those are things we've talked about and heard in other talks in the last few days. So, what are the metrics? Is it accurate? Is there high true positive rate, et cetera? And you can even use XAI, right? And have an explainable model that lets folks know, why did the model pick this particular provider? And then that generates a lead. And so the leads go over to the SMEs, which stands for subject matter experts, right? And the reason it needs to go to a SME is obviously we don't want to do an investigation downstream is very intensive. It requires getting medical records from providers. Obviously, you wouldn't want to request medical records and make the provider go through that exercise unless you were pretty sure that there was something interesting to see there. And obviously no one likes getting accused of fraud, especially if you don't deserve it. So you really want to make sure before you act that you have a solid case there. So usually when something comes out of a model, it goes to a SME, subject matter expert for manual review, and they really deep dive in there, right? And what they need to do during that is to determine if further action should be taken, and they have criteria too, and their criteria is very important, right? Because their criteria is they need to articulate a reason why what we've seen in the claim records warrants an investigation being opened, right? And so what was proposed most often by the data scientist is really that first part of build the model, get some explainability for why the model said what it said, throw that over the fence to the SME, and let them figure out what to do next, right? And we did a great job. Like, we use the best metrics, use the best XAI, and we're done. What our customer, as AI practitioners, what our customer needs to do is they need to articulate to the special investigations unit, why is this suspicious, right? And they can't just say, well, the model, the Shapley value said this or that. They need a very solid reason that someone understands and can trust. And so that's what was needed to be delivered, right? And so there can be a discrepancy there between what the AI practitioner feels like that they're supposed to do and what their actual customer needs. Now, if the SMEs can find what they need from another source, then they may not be so excited to work with you, right? And we, I've seen this pop up lots of times where they can get a very clear, and one example I use is double billing, right? Where two providers are they're billing for the same service, or a provider's billing twice for the same service, I should say, and that's easy for them to understand. So if they can get examples of that, they're going to go with that over some model and Shapley values and all the things that we do. So the need there was not really understood, and it wasn't really articulated or understood by all parties in this case. And so a lot of thought has to go into, how can we make sure that they get that information they need, and we're really actually solving their problem, as opposed to just doing what we think we need or what they need and what we've heard about. And so, and once they have that information, that's when they can have the action, right? Like they know what the allegation is going to be. They can articulate it to the investigators, and then you can move forward.
Does everybody understand the difference between the first part and the second? Yeah. I mean, the first part, you end up giving information and just informing. Yeah. But then once we were able to understand what motivated them, what made them successful, we then empowered them, right? With tools, with information to do their job better and to close and it was tied to their goals. Right. Yeah. Instead of just our initial goals or what they asked for. So. Yeah. And this use case, as Marinka and I were talking, we were making the slide. I mean, this one's really on the AI practitioner to figure out, right? The SMEs are not going to come to you and say, you can't just use explainable AI with me. I need to know the reason. They're just trying to work through their business process, and you're either going to help them or not.
but the better you understand what they actually have to do, the better you can deliver and make their lives easier. And when you can make their lives easier, that's when you'll really get engagement from them, right? Instead of giving them an extra thing to worry about. Okay, so another use case is from the pharma space. And this is forecasting patient drug discontinuation. So in the pharma space, especially with specialty pharmacy and very high cost drugs, there's revenue implications for when a patient stops taking the drug. And there's lots of good reasons they can take the drug or stop taking the drug. There's some reasons where it's the pharma company can help out. Like for instance, one I always heard was, well, you know, you need an infusion of this medication. You wouldn't want, if you're paying, I don't know, I'm making up a number here, but if a drug costs $500,000 a year and someone's going to stop taking it because they can't get a ride to the infusion center, it may be worth it for the pharma company to, you know, get them to the infusion center. And so in the pharma speak, the initiation is a patient starting on the drug and the discontinuation is a patient stopping on the drug. And so the idea was, you know, leadership came to the team and was like, hey, we don't really understand how many patients are going to go off the drug or discontinue in a certain month. So we have data on who has in the past, and we want you to build a model to forecast who's going to go in the future. Right. And the reason we want to do that is there's revenue implications. And so if we had this number, we could handle all the revenue implications for this. So just give us that. And they were super excited. They wanted to work with us. I think Ann mentioned this, like sometimes they get the customers or people you're working with get really excited about using AI for something. They were very excited about using AI for this use case. Right. And so the idea and what was requested is they wanted to know what the discontinuations would be. And, you know, because the drop in drug use is, you know, equals revenue loss, which makes sense, right? But totally good. And it was very tempting to just go like, okay, they're excited. You know, the VP's working with us. Like, I'm going to give them what they want next week. They're going to have these forecasts. But that wasn't actually what they needed, right? Because predicting discontinuations equals revenue loss is not an action, right? It's a need, right? But it wasn't what an action was, because they were I think they hadn't thought this part out yet, but they were going to take that information and do something with it. And what were they going to do with it, right? And that's what I spent time on in our meetings, which is, what if it's 500? You know, what if discontinuations next month is 500? Well, you know, what are you going to do? What if it's 50? What if I say it's 500, but the model says it's 500, but it actually is going to be 50? Like, does that cause a huge problem? Does that not? Right. So we had to get through that and ask questions. And one strategy I always do there in those situations is, instead of doing the whole project and seeing that they don't like it, you know, I'll sort of say, hey, what if it is 50? Like, let's say I did it and this is the answer. Is that going to be good for you or not? And so, you know, what they actually need to do after all those questions is they need to do financial planning, right? If there was a big drop, you know, if they needed this financial risk model, if there was a big drop going to be a big drop in revenue, you know, they needed to report that to senior leadership. They needed to make sure that we didn't spend as much. They also needed to start planning to either reduce the number of patients who are going to continue, or, you know, make sure that folks who hadn't gotten the drug but needed it could, you know, initiate in, and they could sort of fix any potential revenue issues. So that was what happened. But if I had it was very tempting to just go and be like, oh, well, they want it, they're excited about it, I'm going to give it to them. But actually, they were much happier with what happened at the end, because we actually, you know, tried to talk to them and figure out what their real problem was, and give them what they needed, even though they maybe didn't request that in the beginning. And so I think Marika has another use case for us here.
So more on the data side and the provider side. I worked recently with a company that was trying to put together a provider survey, right? And so they said, we just want you to analyze it. So the product team and the design team kind of put together the survey. They figured out how they were going to get it online. They set the survey up. And then we got the results, and we were there ready to analyze it. And then we put the analytics together and presented it to the leadership. And we tried as we might. We tried to the leadership ended up giving us a whole bunch more questions because we were missing information. It wasn't really tied to the outcomes that they were looking for or what drove them. And it ended up being a lot of rework, right? oh, well, we'll just ask one more question, or we'll embed this back into the survey or the application to just like add that one little extra question as part of the sign on, or as part of the confirming the results of the particular action that they were supposed to do. And that required redesign. It required putting another piece of information, disruption, change of the entire flow of the user, of the provider. It required educate, like all kinds of stuff, right? A lot of disruption, a lot of rework, because we didn't think through it. And the reason why I think we didn't think through it in that particular instance was because design was told to do something for a particular reason from a specific group within the organization, and they did a fabulous job, right? But the key to analytics is that we kind of get, first off, it's our framework and our approach, right? To make sure that we kind of think through everything and the whole ecosystem of what we're doing and why, right? So being able to take that approach and bring it back to the design team, the next time we did the survey, or we did another survey and embedded it into another part of the product, what ended up happening is we had the questions up there and we said, well, how are you going to measure that? Well, instead of yes, no, maybe we can have it the actual number, right? Because then the number isn't just two categories of yes, no, the number is a continuum, and then we would be able to break it out into components or into categories. We'd be able to measure against that, right? Male, female against a certain number in terms of revenue, or the number of claims that you put in, instead of do you put claims in yes or no, right? That gives you a lot from an analytics perspective. We know that that gives you a lot more power to slice and dice the information so that you can answer the questions, and much more flexibility. And so having the analytics as part of the design of the product or the survey, in this particular case for the data collection, made a huge difference. And it allowed for expanded use of that information for multiple areas of the organization. It also allowed for embedding it. It embedded the outcomes as part of the process. So we knew that when we were going to create that outcomes to our clients, that we had the information because we already planned for it as part of the design. And then it was immediately demonstrated value because we didn't have to wait. It decreased the time for analysis. And then it also was tied to immediate action because other parts of the organization knew what they were going to do with that information right away, right? And so instead of what they requested, which was creating a provider survey analysis, what we ended up doing is better understanding the end-to-end and creating a provider value assessment process that they really needed, which then enabled them to decrease their provider abrasion and update their strategy around provider abrasion overall. Now, I think that one of the lessons learned, or the key points that was hard for me at the time, was really helping people understand and getting their buy-in around the value that doing that extra work and not just doing the analysis would bring at the end of the day, right? Because I think that sometimes you'll get someone that says, just stay in your lane, do the work, do the analysis, and you have to kind of understand and also sell people, both the leadership as well as the other teams that you're working on, to why it's important and how it's going to save everybody a lot of time and effort and bring a lot more value to the outcomes and the output that you do. So I don't know, you probably had similar.
Yeah, definitely.
So I know that we have a small room today because
Last talk of the conference. Yeah.
But we thought we would ask if you have ever had that experience. Are there any situations that where you have been in where you wanted to do more, or where you learned from your after the fact that you could have done it better if you had just asked a couple more questions or thought about the user and how the user was going to go ahead and interact with whatever output you gave?
Yeah, and that can be for folks on Zoom too.
Just raise your hand and we'll unmute you.
Yep.
So I work with civil engineers in research project, and we had a workshop 2 months ago, talking to some of the ones about how AI was being part of civil engineering, and what we deduced was it's just another tool. So it's not pixie dust, it's not like a Stargate, it's not like a warp drive, it's like another tool.
Yeah.
And that it helps to routinize some of the easier things,
Mhm.
but the harder things it does. That it could help, we thought it might be able to help make inspectors who go into areas after making more efficient by speeding their work to kind of routinize things that are simple. And that would give them more attention budget to spend on the harder things. So that's one thing that I think that we concluded is that really that the SMEs really what's important is of course the money, but really it's their budget of their attention, and their energy to spend on.
Yeah, I love that example. Yeah, because in fraud, you start with millions of doctors and the AI pares it down to, something that human could look at, like maybe I'm making a number up, but let's say 1,000 or a couple hundred. So you go from a million to a small amount, but getting from that small amount to who gets goes to investigation, that's the hard part, right? And AI probably isn't good at doing that, or doesn't have a high enough accuracy to be able to do it.
And it's funny too, because I realized that in the history of computing from the 60s and 50s, I mean, really, it's been about automating routine stuff. I mean, that's basically,
Yeah.
we're not using typewriters anymore, and we're not putting stuff in the mailbox. And, it's making those routine activities more efficient. It's proceduralizing them, it's making them automatic. So this is just the next thing that does that. And it's funny, when I've been using Google's helpful suggestions that they shove at me, I'm finding that like about a third of them are wrong.
Yeah.
Wrong, like not a little bit wrong, like wrong.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, I'm not going to listen to that crazy thing.
Yeah.
So that's in that tangent. Another tangent, if I could.
Yeah. Well,
Please.
can I ask you one question
Yeah,
about your
sure.
first tangent? Who was the entity that said, "Oh, we're going to use this pixie dust to solve all the civil engineers' problems"? Where did that come from?
I'm involved in a project at Purdue called the Contact Nuance Illinois Project.
Oh,
This
cool.
is like
Okay.
doing analysis of data from CERN. And about 5 years ago, machine learning was like the new warp drive. Everyone was going to use it. They were
Yeah.
throwing it at problems like just a bucket of paint. Well, look, it's all shiny now. Right? And I was like, you guys don't understand. You have to know the math and the algorithm behind it. It's not the next big thing. It's just another tool. So I think now they're becoming more realistic about it. So I think now in civil engineering, these are suit wearing fellows and ladies, right? I mean, they're very serious people. So they see it as like, okay, that's helpful, but they have to sign off on designs because people will get hurt if there's a problem. So they're pretty conservative. So I haven't seen this like, oh, we're gonna chase this. They're kind of skeptical, but they're also intrigued. And I think like this automation or routine is something, and maybe even catching problems that it fatigues me like this.
Yeah. You actually mentioned something when we were discussing yesterday about the transition from existing, trusted, reliable, old ways of doing things versus bringing in
Yeah.
AI and the reticence. And so.
Yeah, because at least what I've seen happen in some cases is people are comfortable, like it's assumed like, okay, SMEs are going to make mistakes sometimes.
Yeah,
And AI can make mistakes,
right.
but people get frustrated if the mistakes that the AI makes are different or of a different kind than the ones the SMEs make, even if they're better. Even if on the whole, the AI makes fewer mistakes.
AI can automate dumb decisions if that's what it was trying to.
Yeah.
And I think it's a comfort zone, so it's almost as though people get, they trust in the error rate associated with the things that they know. So I know that I am always going to get my shirt stuck in the door handle whenever I go by, because that always happens, or I'll trip over something, and that's okay. But if I was in a machine that actually it could do it much less but I would still be reticent to use it if I knew that that could happen, right?
Yeah.
It's just the weirdest thing there, even the driving the car.
Oh, yeah, like, we've all decided that, okay, people are not gonna stop texting and driving, right? Like, it's gonna happen. You can tell people not to do it, you can give them tickets, but unless you like make them stop, like, some people will still do it. And so there's some like rate of accident per mile driven from people doing that. The rate of accidents driven in self-driving cars is actually lower than people, but the kinds of mistakes they make aren't the kinds of mistakes people make. And so people are like, well, it's dangerous, you know, they can do this thing that's wrong. But, you know, we've just all said, well, we're not gonna get people to stop driving and stop, you know, texting sometimes. So, you know, it's just, we're comfortable with that one mistake, but not the other, yeah.
So can I go to the other?
Yeah, please
Yeah.
do, yeah.
So there's a really good model by an author called Everett Rogers. It's called Diffusion of Innovations. And it's from the sixties, actually. And it talks about the process that a community goes through when a new innovation presents itself to the community. And the process it goes through to discover it, to trial it, then eventually perhaps adopt it or reject it. So when you're going through your discussion of different communities you work with, it reminded me of you're really dealing with the diffusion of innovations because you've got basically early adopters that comes from this model, laggards.
Mhm.
So it's a great book to look at because you can be very deliberate about how you introduce an innovation to a community, knowing you're going to go through these stages
Mhm.
and identifying your early adopters and helping them go through the process of
Yeah.
trialing the adoption, creating innovation to see if it works for them, because they're really the leaders
Mhm.
that decide whether something's adopted or not.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great idea, and I've noticed that's happened with tools. You know, yeah, where it's like you find one person who's like, oh, it's kind of interesting, and then you get them to use it, and I've even done this where we'll just use the tool if it's like an application or something, but we're using it, you know, for internal B2B
Yeah.
customers, you know, or other teams. We'll just use it in front of them. Like, we're like, oh, do you want to use it? No. I like how I do things.
So
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
people do is they go, is it worth the investing of my time to fool around with this thing?
Yeah.
It would pay off, and that's what this book talks about,
Yeah.
Yeah.
because the early adopters are willing to do it.
Mhm.
And they're the edge of the front in the community, and they report back like, yeah, this kind of works. It's
Mhm.
worth looking at, or they'll say, no, it's a big waste of money.
Yeah.
So what I told people when one of the projects I was on, we built a cyber infrastructure, as I said.
Mhm.
This is like opening a new restaurant, the best meal has got to be the best meal they ever ate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll never come back.
Yeah.
So this stuff has to work, rock solid, no debug, no using your customers as your debugging group.
Yeah.
Testing group, because they're gonna go, this thing's terrible, I'm not wasting my time on this.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing is I'd suggest looking at the diffusion of innovations model by Everett Rogers, because you could be very intentional and deliberate about what you're doing.
Yeah. No, that's a great idea. Yeah, sort of how it gets socialized and.
Yeah, because that's important. I mean, the one thing I once said, computers include people.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a crazy idea, but like people are a part of the computer system because without people, there's no need for computers.
Yeah.
So you really have to understand, you know, how they're going to use it, which is what we're trying to talk about today,
Mhm.
but also, you know, what hurdles there are, psychological hurdles like you're talking about, or adoption hurdles that you might be right here in this bottom right quadrant where you might have the best innovation ever that's going to change the world, but nobody can use it or nobody understands how to use it. And so the question is it part of your job as a scientist to understand and recognize that and try to overcome that to be successful,
Mhm.
right? And that's it. Is it your job just to give the numbers, or is it your job to actually push and help people understand how
Yeah.
to use those numbers?
Yeah, and I
So-
think in an AI context, like AI business context, you know, at least I found myself like, well, you know, I want to make sure it gets used and goes up to that upper right quadrant. So and also as the AI practitioner, oftentimes you have the data, right? Like, you needed that data to build the model in the first place. So you wind up having to go stretching out further than you normally intend to. But if that's what it takes to do it, you know, and it's worth your investment, then you know, you
No,
can do
I
it.
was thinking too, when, like, if smartphones were invented in the 1980s and they just dropped them on people.
Yeah.
I don't know if they would have been adopted or not, because think about it, we went from pagers,
Yeah,
pagers with numbers,
yeah,
Blackberries. You
yeah,
know, email back in the 80s wasn't a thing, I mean,
yeah,
so in a way that was an adoption process that
Mhm.
was simple. Made people go, yeah, this is worth it.
Yeah.
They're willing to then look at the next stage in the technology.
In previous conversations that I've had about this topic, I talked about radar. So for those of you who might be a little older, radar was invented and from how it's shown and displayed today in the 80s, I think it was. And it only started to be adopted because it was so strange, right? We knew barometer, we knew the pressure, we knew the numbers, the temperature. Yeah, weather radar, sorry.
Yeah.
And so then there was the hurricane and there was the egg. And that was the first time that we had, on the Weather Channel, that we had the egg, and I'm like, oh, okay, so now there's 2 colors. Now we have like 3, 4, 5 colors associated with, whether it's a tornado, whether there's like lightning and stuff like that. But if you see that right up front, you're used to that now because you've gotten educated and trained your mind on what these different things are visually. But if you had never seen that before in your life, you would look at it and it would probably look like this picture right here, it would just look very abstract to you and you wouldn't be able to interpret it. So you do need, to your point, you do need time and education and awareness to really be able to understand how to use it. And maybe that's our job, is to help promote and translate that information.
I have a third point too, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And it's beneficiaries that we talked about yesterday. So we talked about mining data from people taking medication, right? So the thing is like, okay, from a drug manufacturer's perspective, they want people to keep taking the medication. They want to understand if there's any impediments that are not allowing them to do that. That's great. But and you have to think about when you're mining that kind of data, where it is about individuals and they do have some expectation of they should benefit from data when they develop themselves. That is beneficial and built into the system. Where is it okay for is it right that someone who may gain an profit or advantage? So this is a thing called the tragedy of the commons. You've heard of the tragedy of the commons? This is the story from the 60s. It's a model called the tragedy of the commons. It's a Potemkin village model.
Yes.
We've got this community pasture that a community shares and they put goats on it, right? There's lots of grass, lots of goats. As long as there's enough grass, you can putting on more goats. Someone gets the benefit of having another goat. The community doesn't notice the loss of that one goat's worth of grass. Once the commons is full and there's no more goats that can handle with that grass, when someone adds a goat, they actually kind of steal grass away from all the other goats.
Yeah.
So the saying is that that's a tragedy of the commons because one person's gain came at the community's loss. So in a way, with this kind of thing, if someone's gaining, it shouldn't come at the loss of the community.
Yeah.
It may appear that, they're not going to notice, but they do, because in the large picture, this starts becoming a drain on the community.
Yeah. I think that also goes into what we've heard over and over again over the last couple of days around intended use. And we see that definitely in healthcare. One example, the EMR, right? The intent of the EMR around taking information that was on paper and turning it into electronic records so that it could be easily measurable, right? Goes into analytics that then track whether hospitals are doing well, that it keeps providers accountable and all of that. I think we didn't think about is the intent, although the intent was noble, right, to help everybody, the actual use of and how it transformed the relationship and the, I guess, the ecosystem of the patient provider interaction, it completely pulled it apart now, which is a brand new problem, right? So our attempt to solve a problem created another problem, mostly because did we take the time to think about how added technology and typing all this stuff in
Yeah.
would actually impact the time
Yeah.
spent with the doctor.
I think it's a great example. I have this as a faculty member. They assume that, well, the doctors can spend a few minutes typing this in.
Right.
But they're gaining this additional knowledge at the expense of the doctor's time.
Mhm.
So over many patients, over a long period of time, that's a significant cost to the medical provider
Yeah.
community for the benefit of a small number of groups or individuals
Yeah.
to get the data.
So that sheep and common thing was
Yeah,
perfect.
well, yeah, it's
Yeah.
funny, in fact, at work, I've been saying, hey, we should have just like when you do the taxes, it has the estimate of time it takes to do your taxes. For all the administrative stuff they give faculty to do from 100 different places. They should give the university a set time budget for faculty week. We have 5 hours a week of their time. If you add something, you have to take something away because you're not going to go over 5 hours of their time.
Mhm.
So there's.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I feel like in universities, they just add it.
They just keep piling it in,
Yeah.
right? So that's an example where the doctors are being asked to do more and more that aren't directly
Yeah.
related to providing care to the patient.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my,
No, that's good. Those are good examples.
So I think to conclude, I guess we could put together we presented some recommendations of things that
Yeah.
we've seen that we have done in the past potentially, or that we see
Mhm.
people do, and practitioners do, and so you go ahead.
Oh, yeah, so the first one's the problem, so that, don't presume that you know what's needed. A lot of it is about listening and understanding what the real problem is. And also, nobody may know right away, right? Like people may think they know, but it takes a while and some conversations to figure it out. Like that could be a sort of iterative process, but to have that open mind, to figure out what the business process was or is for your customer and the folks you're working with.
Just to add to that, so I don't know about you, but I love solving problems immediately.
Yeah.
And so I've been in so many meetings where I'm sitting around the table and the customer or someone else comes up and says, and is talking about a problem, and I'm immediately, I can solve that. I just need to create a new table, connect them, and then we're going to create a new interface and it'll all be on the cloud and it'll all work, right?
Yeah.
In the steps that it took and the time that it took for you to solve the problem in your head, you just missed any other part of the conversation that the people were talking about.
Yeah.
So be present and listen.
Yeah, another one is expectations. It's very, very tempting when they come up to you, your business partner comes up to you and it's like, I want you to do this. I'll be very happy if you do this. It's like, yeah, I'm going to do it. I can do that, and you get all excited, but it's best to think about their problem and figure out like, hey, what action are you willing to take when this happens, and tie that to an action. So they need you to do that, right? Because on the day they give you that, they may be excited, but when you actually deliver it, they will not be excited. They may not realize it the first day you give it to them, but somewhere down the line, it's like, oh my God, I got the forecast, but like I have to do all this stuff to figure out something else. So at some point, they'll come back to you for it, but they'll be, it's hard on everybody once you've already built what they wanted and they're not happy with it, right? So it's better to do that up front, and as tempting as it is to just say yes, just to push back and do that.
I had a colleague of and person, a mentor that used to always say yes if, yes if, and then he would go ahead. So he
Yeah.
never said no.
Yeah, and another thing about expectations that I was thinking about that I've seen, because I know LLMs have been a big topic lately is, I've noticed that there'll be requests for getting an LLM to give you, feedback or to highlight a very specific sequence of events that has to be exact, like sign this form, then do this with this form, and like wind their way through, like explanation of benefits or contract or something very, very specific. And that's something that at least now, and I think people are still like figuring out what kind of, how far can you push the LLMs? That's something that I've been wanting to push back on when I hear it is like, we don't know it can do that. Like, we don't know that it has that capability, but people get excited that, that, oh, it's going to solve our problems, or, it's the fairy dust issue, right? So at least for LLMs, I think that's one thing that I've been seeing. And then, yeah, I guess there's the data piece, if you want to.
I think that, so whenever you use data, garbage in, garbage out, we know that. But one of the things that at least I try to hold true is that what I do and the information that I process is part of my output and part of my brand, I guess, for lack of a better word. And so I have to take ownership of the information. That I can't use, oh, that data sucked as an excuse, because it doesn't help anybody down the line, or anybody that I'm trying to help. I can't be like, oh, that data sucked, so I'm sorry, the medication that I gave you, you're gonna die. Like you can't do that. So you have to not make assumptions about your data, but rather own and advocate for the importance of data. Like even when we were at in our previous roles, when we had to get more information because we knew the data was incomplete, and we spent a good month saying, no, we need access to this table and we need access to this information set. And they said, well, why? That's never been done before. Well, and then you go ahead and you provide the rationale behind why you need that extra data, and you don't stop because it's so important to and it will impact what the quality of the product that you're going to, and the analytic that you're going to be putting out. So yeah, so that's it. Thank you. If there is anything else or any other questions. If not, then it was amazing. Great to have everybody online and here.
Yeah,
So,
thanks for having me.
thanks.